Hey guys, welcome back to Games of War. Today's episode is right game, wrong time. Now, very much in life and everything else, timing is everything. In gaming, this applies as well. Releasing a game at the wrong time can be critical. It can make or break a game. Whether it's released in a stacked month full of tons of other games that gets lost in the shuffle, or it was released at the tail end of a system's life, timing is everything. And today's video is some examples of games that were the right game that just unfortunately were released at the wrong time and ultimately suffered because of it. Thank you guys for watching as always, and I hope you enjoy. Some classic examples of right game, wrong time are Rise Star, Comic Zone, and the Vector Man games. Now these all have one thing in common: they were all released in mid to late 95 or even 96. Now at this point, to put it in perspective for you, the Genesis was all but on its deathbed. And Sega also had two other systems that were performing horribly, the Sega CD and the 32X. So to take all their resources and produce these AAA games for a dying system that was already on its way out, it just confuses me to no end. Now, I get from a business standpoint why they would want to put these games out on the Genesis. It had the largest install base, and if a game was going to sell well, it would likely be on the system that is in tons of homes, whereas the Sega CD and the 32X didn't have near the install base. However, if you look at the Sega CD, for instance, real quick, it had one game created from the ground up from Sega, that's Sonic CD. A kind of new entry in a series from the Genesis. Where was the Streets of Rage CD? Where was, Gunstar Heroes 2? Where was a new Phantasy Star game on the Sega CD with anime cutscenes and a beautiful orchestral soundtrack? They never put any effort into the Sega CD, but yet at the tail end of 95, when the Genesis is all but dead and being overshadowed by polygons and 32-bit games, they're going to release some of the best games for the system just to get lost in the shuffle and completely ignored. It's very sad what happened to Rise Star. This is one of my favorite platformers of the 16-bit generation. Originally created as a game called Feel, where you'd play as a rabbit with long, stretchy ears that would use those ears to kind of grab onto enemies and pull himself forward, grab onto ledges and use momentum. Well, that basic gameplay mechanic stuck in Rise Star. However, they replaced the rabbit with the little star figure, and it's just an immensely playable and enjoyable game. Now, as Rise Star, you can use your stretchy arms to grab onto enemies and kind of pull yourself in and headbutt them to kill enemies. You can use your stretchy arms to grab ledges and use your arms as kind of like a swinging back and forth momentum type thing where you can rocket yourself across the levels. One of the best looking games of the 16-bit generation on any console, one of the best sounding games. The color palette just explodes across the screen. It's utterly gorgeous, the music is great, and it's one of the most fun platforming games that I've played from the entire generation. It's that good. It was often referred to by inner people at Sega as like the successor to Sonic, so they wanted this game to kind of pass the torch from Sonic, which does not make sense. You don't release a game of this caliber in late 95 when the system is on its deathbed. You should have taken those resources and actually made some highly original games for the Sega CD, or even the 32X for that matter. Those systems were left out to die while the Genesis that's on its deathbed is getting these great games. Same with Comic Zone. One of the best looking, most original ideas at the time. An excellent beat 'em up. You play as a character named Sketch, who's a comic book artist. There's a thunderstorm outside, lightning strikes, and the main villain from the comic he's writing appears in the real world and traps Sketch in his own game. This game plays like a comic book come to life, where you go from cell to cell, just like reading a comic, and you can see the enemy drawing in, penciling in enemies as you go along. The combat system is awesome. It's brutally difficult. Comic Zone is very challenging, almost unfairly so, but it is possible. It's very enjoyable, and once again, wait till the system is on its deathbed to release one of the most original and enjoying beat-em-ups in the entire generation. Now, the Vector Man games fared a little better because obviously it got a sequel and must have done something right. However, once again, this is 96 by the time Vector Man 2 came out. Everybody had moved on, whether it was to the PlayStation or looking forward to the 64, very few to the Saturn. So this was kind of Sega's answer to the Donkey Kong Country series on the Super Nintendo. It used kind of a pre-rendered CG 3D style look. Very impressive. No one thought the Genesis could do graphics like these, but here it is running. A run-and-gun shooter with, once again, a pretty steep, difficult curve. These games are very challenging. A lot of fun to play. Vector Man is an awesome character, and I personally believe that due to the time this was released, we never saw another game in this series again. All of these games, these two unfortunately only one-offs. This got a sequel, but after the Genesis, these games were never heard from again. They've appeared on collections and compilations, but never a new game in the series. And I think Rystar could have been just as strong as character as Sonic, so it's really sad what happened to him. As a Sega fan, I can't help but wonder if Rystar was released when he was supposed to originally back in 92, 93. If he had been released on the Sega CD, could Rystar have been the mascot for the Sega CD? Would we have seen a whole franchise of games take off like Sonic the Hedgehog and the Sega CD be known for the creation of Rystar? Or could we have seen maybe some awesome Comic Zone on the Sega CD back in '94 with hand-drawn, beautiful animated graphics and awesome opening anime cutscenes with comic book renderings? Could that have been a huge franchise in the Sega CD? Could the Vector Man games have been some of the early polygonal 2.5D games in the 32X? I guess we'll never know because Sega never took the proper time or resources to give those systems a chance. Instead, they poured all their efforts and resources into very much right games at the wrong time. Another example of right game, wrong time is from Sega once again. And once again, in the year 1995, later on, we got Beyond Oasis for the Genesis. Now, we all know the Legend of Zelda series. In my opinion, this game can hang with that series as action RPGs. It's that good. Outstanding production value on the system. Music by Yuzo Koshiro, so you know it's good for those that are familiar with his work. Playing as Prince Ali, you find a golden amulet, and this amulet is kind of connected to a silver amulet that was controlled by an evil wizard. And from there, it's a pretty cool storyline, battling this evil wizard with the silver amulet. You get these spirits like water spirits and fire spirits. You get all kinds of cool spells. It's a top-down, hand-drawn action RPG, and it's got some insane boss battles and awesome battle system, beat 'em up specific controls. This is one of those games that, once again, it was so late in the system's life that nobody really cared. At this point, 2D wasn't cool like it is now. It's not this retro nation where everything old is cool. This was a dead format. Nobody cared about 2D. Once the PlayStation hit and everybody saw 3D graphics, this was done. Beyond Oasis could have been a series that went on and is still going strong like Zelda. It's just as good, in my opinion. It did get a sequel, which had to have done something right once again, but let's be honest, Legend of Oasis, once again, another brilliant game and a strong continuation. Excellent 2D graphics on the Saturn. The Saturn was a 2D powerhouse. This game was released and was forgotten within 2 or 3 months. It didn't sell well, and this is the last we've heard of it. It's sad. This is a series that is just as strong as Zelda, but look where it's forgotten in obscurity. Once again, right game, wrong time. This game should have been released on the Sega CD with beautiful animated cutscenes back in '93, a powerhouse to show off the system, to make somebody say, wow, look at that, you can't get this anywhere else, I've got to have this Sega CD. This is a must-own game. The only way to play it is the Sega CD. Let's get that new console. This is how you get consoles out there. Give strong original IPs to the system. Don't release one of the best games when the system is already dead on the Genesis. It made no sense to me. I'm not going to go off on a rant, but this is another series that is brilliant. It was the right game, definitely the wrong time. Eternal Champions Challenge from the Dark Side. One of my favorite 16-bit fighters was Eternal Champions. And this is, I think, one of 2 games that started off on the Genesis and actually got a sequel on the Sega CD and was a big improvement. Now, we got Sonic CD, that's one original game. Eternal Champions, believe it or not, is the only fresh original game created for the Sega CD. Sure, we've got games like Echo the Dolphin, which took the Genesis games, ported them to the Sega CD, added a brilliant soundtrack, changed nothing else. This game was how a sequel should be done. This added, I think, 9 new fighters. It added better animations, better graphics, better music, much better music. Tons of new finishing moves like Cinekills, which were like full motion video fatalities. Tons of new finishers, new stages. This was the complete package and a very good sequel. Problem is, this came out at the end of the Sega CD's life, very late in the system's life. At this point, nobody had cared about this system. Had Sega taken this kind of approach and beefed up a lot of Genesis games for release on the Sega CD, made a lot of sequels, Chakan 2, Decap Attack 2, Kid Chameleon 2, all of the excellent Genesis games could have continued on the Sega CD with beefed up graphics and awesome soundtracks. The system would have been a sure contender. This is an example of how to do that. This was very well made. It's still a lot of fun today. The production value on the Sega CD is awesome. There's all kinds of animated full motion video backstories for each character, showing them the moment before their death and all its full motion video cutscene detail. Sequel done right, very well executed on the Sega CD. I wish more would have been done like this. Sonic CD and Eternal Champions are examples of games done right. Sadly, Sega dropped the ball on nearly everything else. The 3DO, often looked back as a pretty big failure and a kind of a joke for most gamers. Very expensive at the time, and some of the early games, while they looked very good and they were light years beyond other systems at the time, the system lacked a vision and it lacked like a killer demonstration of why you had to have this system. Granted, if the price had been a little lower and a game like Blade Force had come out early on, this would have made people buy this system. A full, true 3D game, go anywhere you want, and then very limited small stages, but they were decent size for the day, and this had a smooth frame rate. This is a problem that a lot of 3DO games suffer from, is just a horrendous frame rate and stuff getting really blocky when you get up close. This was the first really, truly impressive full 3D game that I had played, and you could only get it on the 3DO, and it came out sadly too late in the system's life to really impress people. Had this come out when the system was launched and people saw a game that ran like this and looked like this, I think the system would have been a hit. Granted, it needed to be a little bit cheaper, but this is the kind of game that the 3DO needed. The explosions are insane, the frame rate holds up very well. This game holds up well to this day, which is a lot more than I can say for a lot of the 3DO games, sadly. It's only available on 3DO, and it is a graphical powerhouse with a really good story, too. Really impressive cinemas, so, had the 3DO had more games like this when the system first came out, coupled with a lower price point, I think things would have been a lot different for this system. Definitely the right game, just a little too late at the wrong time. Powerslave on the Sega Saturn is a classic example of right game at the wrong time. Lobotomy was a company that created a 3D engine on the Saturn that ran versions of Duke Nukem, and it was very well received. I think often edging out the PlayStation version and I think the 64 version in terms of quality, graphics, and frame rate. And this you guys got to remember, the Saturn was considered inferior 3D-wise to the PlayStation. That was a big deal early on, and a lot of the reason why the system lost any momentum was when Virtua Fighter was released. It was so embarrassingly bad, Sega themselves had to do like an I'm sorry and issued Virtua Fighter Remix, which is like a do-over. PlayStation had games like Battle Arena Toshinden, which was a 3D fighter that was very smooth and very good looking for the time. So the Saturn was written off as not being able to do 3D properly, plus it rendered quadrilaterals instead of polygons as a standard. However, when Lobotomy got a hold of the system and put out a game called Powerslave, now this was after Duke Nukem, they took all their experience in their engine, made some modifications, and released this, and to this day, it is very impressive looking. I believe this was ported to the PlayStation later on and didn't look as good, didn't run as smooth. Had this game been released early on in the Saturn's life and showed people that this system was quite capable when programmed properly for, I think the whole 3D argument would have been moot, because this game holds up well to this day. It's an awesome first-person shooter with like an Egyptian pyramid type theme, awesome weapons, very smooth gameplay. I was shocked when I played this at just how smooth the frame rate was and how well everything looked in motion. It runs well on the Saturn, and it made people take notice. Unfortunately, for the people that had already made decisions on buying systems, it did little to affect that. However, had this been released earlier, I think that people would have looked at the 3D powers of the Saturn in a lot different light, because this was very impressive. Alright guys, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Right Game, Wrong Time. As always, if you feel that a game was released that was awesome, it just came out at the wrong time, definitely talk about it in the comments below. The last couple of videos we've had awesome discussions going. I answer every comment in a timely manner. I really appreciate it. That's why I do this. Next video will probably be a tag response. I've been putting it off for like a month now, over a month. My good buddy Xander asked me 5 gaming facts about myself, and I've really been indecisive about what I want to talk about. So I'm going to film this. I've been waiting on my kid to do it with me too, because he's a big part of my gaming. That's a big reason why it's taken so long, because getting him to try to work on a video is almost impossible. But he'll definitely be in the next one. Go check out Xander. Check out his awesome podcast, XS Gaming Podcast. And if you want to hear myself on more video game related stuff, I just started up a brand new podcast / live stream with my buddy Pete Dorr. It's called the Niche Gamecast. We've got the first episode out. And I also do a podcast with my buddy Joe Corn Muffin X called the CXG Podcast. So definitely check those out. Thank you guys for watching. As always, Games of War is nothing without you.